Hey beautiful, have you considered subscribing to our channel? Help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers.
Evelyn crouched low in the shadows, her heart pounding against her ribs, the cold air biting at her exposed skin. She could barely see through the thick smoke and ash rising from the wreckage of what had once been her home. The invasion had been swift, so swift, it left no time for the weak to flee, for the unprepared to survive. Earth's last stand was no longer a fight for territory. It was a fight for vengeance. The alien warships had come like shadows descending from the sky, an impenetrable force of sleek, metal ships that seemed to be made of living darkness. In the moments before impact, the ground had trembled as though the earth itself had screamed. A sudden explosion had ripped through the air, sending Evelyn tumbling from her feet and scattering debris around her. When she regained consciousness, the once thriving city was a war zone, a reminder that no place on Earth was safe from the unyielding grip of the alien invaders. Evelyn had learned in the few years since the war had begun that surviving meant knowing when to fight, when to hide, and when to escape. She knew this moment was neither the time to fight nor to hide. The humans, rebels like her, had been routed. And she was alone. Alone with nothing but the remnants of what had once been her family, her friends, her world. Her fingers tightened around the cold barrel of the rifle she had scavenged from the wreckage. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. As she moved through the crumbling remains of a once bustling market street, her thoughts drifted back to the last conversation she'd had with her older brother Luca. The night before he was taken. "We can't let them win," he had said, his voice trembling but firm. "They've burned too much. They've stolen too many lives." His words had been a call to arms, an invocation of all that was worth saving. But now, with Luca gone and the ruins of her world all that remained, Evelyn felt his absence like a hollow echo. She couldn't let their deaths be in vain. She couldn't let humanity fall into their hands. As she turned a corner, her breath caught in her throat. A group of alien soldiers patrolled the street. Their armored bodies glimmered in the faint light, and the sound of their low, guttural language sent a chill down her spine. She flattened herself against the wall of a collapsed building, her pulse quickening. She knew she was outnumbered. She knew the odds were against her. But she also knew that this war was hers to fight. The aliens weren't like anything she had ever seen before. Taller than humans, their skin was a mottled gray-green, as if their bodies had been shaped by the harshest elements of the galaxy. Their eyes, large and bulbous, gleamed with an unsettling intelligence, cold and calculating. Their technology was more advanced than anything humanity could have ever dreamed, making their invasion seem like an inevitability. Evelyn had faced them before. She had fought beside her comrades in countless skirmishes, seen them fall, seen them rise again. But nothing had prepared her for the nightmarish machines that the aliens deployed, a mix of living entities and mechanical horrors. Their relentless pursuit of human annihilation had been ruthless. What they couldn't destroy they captured. The sound of footsteps grew louder. She couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. Not when so much had been lost. She darted into the shadows of an alleyway, praying that her presence hadn't been detected. But it had. A sharp, mechanical whine cut through the air as a cloaked figure, a scout, appeared at the end of the alley. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. The alien's gaze swept across the alley, and then in the blink of an eye, it locked onto her. She didn't hesitate. She raised her rifle, her hand steady despite the rush of adrenaline that surged through her veins. She fired. The shot rang out, hitting the scout square in the chest. It crumpled to the ground in a heap of metal and flesh. But before she could retreat, she saw movement. More scouts, more soldiers, emerging from the darkness. They had found her. "Damn it," she muttered under her breath, turning on her heel and running. The rifle was useless now, and she knew it. The aliens' weapons would tear her apart in an instant. She had no choice but to flee. Her feet pounded the ground, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she weaved through the maze of wreckage. The noise of pursuit echoed in her ears. She was faster than them, or at least she had to be. She turned a corner sharply, only to come face to face with a massive alien soldier. It was unlike any she had seen before. Its body was more machine than living tissue, a towering, hulking mass of armor and weaponry. Its face was obscured by a helmet, but its eyes glowed ominously, pinning her with an unnatural gaze. There was no escape. Before she could react, a sharp, cold hand clamped around her throat. The force was crushing, like a vice closing around her neck, and she struggled to draw breath. Her world spun, her vision blurred, and for a brief moment she wondered if this was the end. The aliens were relentless, and this soldier was different from the others. It was as though it had been designed to hunt her, to end her life. But Evelyn refused to go down without a fight. With the last of her strength, she kicked out, her foot connecting with the soldier's shin. It didn't flinch. It didn't even seem to notice. Instead, it tightened its grip, and Evelyn's chest constricted in a painful, desperate attempt to pull air into her lungs. Just as the world around her began to darken, there was a sudden shift. The soldier's grip loosened. She gasped, struggling to breathe, and stumbled backward, her vision still swimming. She didn't know what had happened, but she was alive, just barely. And then, before she could fully comprehend what had occurred, there was a blur of motion. The alien soldier fell to the ground with a metallic clang, its body crumpled unnaturally. Another figure, human like her, stood over it. Her heart skipped a beat. It was a rebel, one she recognized from a previous skirmish. "Get up," the soldier said, offering her a hand. There was urgency in their voice. "We need to move. Now." Evelyn took the hand, her legs unsteady beneath her. She was alive. For now. But the reality of the situation was setting in. The war wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about finding a way to fight back. Finding a way to make the aliens pay for what they had done. As she regained her footing, Evelyn knew one thing for certain. This battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Evelyn's mind raced, the sharp sting of her bruised throat still fresh as she stumbled through the wreckage, the taste of blood lingering on her tongue. The rebel soldier, whose face she couldn't quite place, had pulled her away just in time, but now they were deep in the heart of the alien stronghold. The walls of the underground bunker were cold, metallic, and sterile, an environment so starkly different from the familiar chaos of the war-torn world above that it felt unreal. She could still hear the echoes of her footfalls reverberating in the tight corridors, but there was no sense of safety here. The soldier, who, like her, was clad in the worn-out gear of a rebel, led the way with urgency, turning swiftly at each corner as though he'd memorized the path. His silence was unsettling. Evelyn tried to catch her breath, tried to quell the panic rising in her chest, but her body was failing her. She was spent, physically, emotionally, her limbs shaking from the exertion and the terror of what she'd just barely escaped. "You're not safe here," the soldier finally spoke, his voice low but commanding. He turned back briefly, his face still masked by a helmet, obscuring any hint of emotion. "I'm getting you out, but you need to stay focused. The alien patrols are everywhere." Evelyn nodded, though she felt the weight of dread settling heavily in her stomach. They had made it this far, but it was hard to believe they would make it out. The aliens' reach had extended so far, so deeply embedded in Earth's defenses, that even the rebels who had once held hope, now saw themselves cornered. Every skirmish felt like an uphill battle, a fight they were bound to lose in the long run. The hope they once carried had started to fade, replaced by the bitter understanding that survival, not victory, was their only goal. They rounded another corner, the soldier's boot heels clicking against the metal floor. Evelyn's throat burned with each ragged breath, but she pressed on, forcing her mind to focus on the path ahead. She couldn't let herself collapse. Not yet, not with the fate of humanity on the line. She needed to be strong even if it felt impossible. The soldier stopped abruptly and Evelyn nearly collided with him. He raised a hand in a silent gesture, his posture stiff as he peered around the corner. The sound of alien voices reached her ears, soft and alien, an unnerving hum that set her teeth on edge. They were close. Too close. "Stay behind me," the soldier ordered quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. He crouched low, pressing himself to the wall. Evelyn followed his lead, flattening herself against the cold surface of the corridor. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, and her hand tightened around the hilt of the knife strapped to her thigh. It was all she had left now, her one weapon, the one thing that could give her a fighting chance if it came to that. As they waited, the voices grew louder. 2 alien soldiers appeared in the hallway, their forms casting long shadows across the floor. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat as they passed by without noticing them, their cold, emotionless eyes scanning the corridor ahead. She held her breath, praying that they wouldn't stop, praying they wouldn't notice the 2 humans hiding in the darkness. The soldiers passed, and the tension in Evelyn's chest released in a slow, shaky exhale. She'd survived that. Just barely. But the weight of the situation was sinking in, and her thoughts began to spiral. These weren't just any aliens. These were the same creatures that had wiped out entire cities, the ones who had ravaged her home and taken Luca, her older brother. The same ones who had made humanity their plaything, dissecting and experimenting, probing the very essence of their species. They had no respect for life, human or otherwise, and Evelyn hated them with every fiber of her being. But this was different. They had crossed a line. They had taken something from her that she could never get back. The soldier moved again, pulling her from her thoughts, and they continued deeper into the facility. Each turn, each hallway was another step closer to whatever unknown fate awaited them. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, thick with a sterile metallic scent that made Evelyn's stomach churn. The walls around her seemed to close in, the lights above flickering erratically. There was no sound here, no fighting, no explosions, just an eerie silence that seemed to suffocate everything. She didn't know how much longer she could endure this. Finally they arrived at a door. The soldier placed a hand on a panel beside it, and the door hissed open with a soft, mechanical whine. Inside was a small, dimly lit room, its walls covered in strange alien symbols and flashing lights. There were no windows, just a steel table in the center of the room, a console built into the far wall. It looked like a control center of some kind. Evelyn took a step inside, her eyes scanning the room warily. The soldier moved to the console, his fingers flying over the holographic keys in a blur of motion. He didn't speak, but Evelyn could sense the urgency in his movements. He was doing something, trying to access something. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice raw, barely above a whisper. "A staging ground," the soldier replied, his tone flat. "The aliens are preparing something big. I need to stop them. I can't do it alone." Evelyn felt a pang in her chest. She knew what he was asking. He was asking her to help, to fight. But she was no soldier. She was just a survivor. And yet, in the deepest corner of her heart, she knew there was no way out. Not anymore. "I'll help," she said, surprising even herself with the certainty in her voice. "But I need answers. I need to know why they're doing this. Why they took Luca." The soldier froze, his hands stilling over the console. He turned to face her, his helmet giving no hint of emotion, but his posture was rigid, tense. "They didn't take him," he said, his voice cold. "They turned him." Evelyn felt a chill run through her, colder than the steel walls surrounding them. "What do you mean? Turned him into what?" "A weapon," the soldier replied. "A tool to destroy us." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. The realization was slow to sink in, but when it did, it hit her like a tidal wave. Luca, her brother, her family, had been lost to the aliens. They hadn't just killed him. They had taken what made him human and twisted it into something monstrous. The soldier took a step closer to her, his gaze unwavering beneath the helmet. "We can stop this," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But only if you help me." Evelyn stared at him, her mind a storm of confusion and anger. She wanted to scream, to lash out, but all she could do was nod, her throat tight with emotion. She had always known that there was more at stake than just survival. But now the battle was personal. The fight for humanity's freedom had become her fight, her chance to avenge Luca. The soldier didn't wait for her response. He turned back to the console, his fingers moving with practiced precision. Evelyn watched him for a moment, then took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. The fight for her world was just beginning. And this time she wouldn't run. Not when her brother's fate, and the fate of humanity, depended on it. Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest as the soldier's fingers danced across the console, a blur of swift movements that she barely had time to follow. The steady beeping of the machines around them filled the room with an artificial rhythm, its cadence sharp, unervingly precise. Every pulse of light on the screen was a countdown, a reminder that time was slipping through their fingers. "We need to move," the soldier muttered, his voice low, as if aware of the weight of every passing second. Evelyn nodded, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold surface of the wall. She had no idea what he was doing, no clue what kind of plan they were trying to execute. The room around them was sterile, too clean, with no sign of life except for the faint hum of alien technology that powered the facility. Her mind, still foggy from her escape and the brutality she had just survived, struggled to keep up with the urgency of the soldier's actions. He was a ghost in this place, a figure that moved with purpose, while she could only watch, consumed by the flood of thoughts and emotions that threatened to drown her. "How do you know what to do?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. It wasn't just curiosity, it was fear, a deep-seated anxiety about the unknown, about everything that had been happening since her capture, since Luca's disappearance. The soldier didn't pause his movements. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen, his focus unwavering. "I've been in this fight longer than most. I've seen things. I've learned things." Evelyn felt a sharp pang of jealousy at his calmness, his cold efficiency. He had answers. He had knowledge. She had nothing but questions. Her body still throbbed from the injuries she had sustained, a constant reminder of the cruelty the aliens had inflicted on her. But it wasn't just the physical pain. It was the emotional wreckage, the uncertainty of what she was walking into. The hollow knowledge that Luca was lost, twisted into something else entirely, was a wound she couldn't seem to heal. She had never been meant for this. She was a survivor, not a fighter. But in this moment she had no choice but to fight. Not just for her life, but for the remnants of humanity. To keep the pieces of her world from falling into the hands of creatures who viewed life as disposable. The soldier turned abruptly, his movements sharp as he glanced at the door, his expression hidden behind the helmet. "They'll be here soon. I've activated the alarm." Evelyn's breath hitched. "You what?" "There's no time to waste. If we're going to do this, we need to move now." His tone was clipped, as though he had long since stopped questioning the necessity of such actions. It was clear he had already accepted the risk. She, on the other hand, was still too new to this. Too raw. Her pulse quickened as the metallic echo of footsteps reverberated down the corridor, each footfall a thunderous reminder of the approaching danger. Evelyn instinctively stepped closer to the soldier, her mind spinning. She wasn't sure what was happening or how it was all supposed to fit together, but the urgency in his voice was enough to push her into motion. They raced out of the room, their footsteps muffled by the heavy silence of the facility, but the distant sounds of the aliens' pursuit grew louder with every passing second. Evelyn could feel the adrenaline surge through her veins, pushing her forward, but her thoughts were fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle she hadn't yet put together. "What's the plan?" she gasped, barely able to keep up with the soldier's swift pace. "We're going to find their control center," he replied, his voice unwavering. "There's a central core. If I can access it, I can stop the invasion. I'll disrupt their systems long enough for us to escape." The idea of confronting the alien control center, of walking into the heart of their operations, made her stomach churn. She had no experience with this. She was just a girl who had lost everything, not a soldier who had learned how to dismantle an empire. But the thought of Luca, of the twisted version of him that the aliens had created, made her blood run cold. If there was even the slightest chance of stopping them, she had to take it. They turned down another corridor, and Evelyn's gaze flicked nervously from side to side, scanning for any sign of danger. The flickering lights above them cast strange shadows against the walls, distorting the space around them. The facility felt more like a tomb than a military installation. Silent, oppressive, and utterly foreign. "We're close," the soldier muttered, and Evelyn could see the faintest glimmer of determination in his posture. It was the first sign of emotion he had shown since they'd met. She wanted to ask him more, about the rebels, about his past, about why he was so willing to risk his life, but there was no time. He wasn't the type to indulge in conversation, and even if he were, Evelyn didn't think she could handle hearing more of the harsh reality they were facing. Not now. Suddenly they rounded another corner and Evelyn froze. There, standing at the end of the hallway, was a group of alien soldiers. Their towering forms were unmistakable, their bodies rigid with the same cold, mechanical precision that had characterized every alien she had seen. The leader of the group, a hulking figure with dark, reflective eyes, was at the front, his gaze sweeping the corridor with an unsettling intensity. For a moment, everything stood still. The soldier beside her didn't hesitate. He pushed Evelyn toward the nearest doorway, an old storage room, his hand pressing her down into a crouch behind a stack of crates. She could hear her own heart thundering in her ears, and for a fleeting second, she wondered if this was the end. If she would die in this sterile hell, her name lost to the void of space. She had nothing left to give. Nothing but a desperate need for vengeance. The soldier didn't wait. With a single, silent command, he crept toward the soldiers, moving with the quiet precision of someone who had done this countless times before. His movements were so fluid, so practiced, that Evelyn had no choice but to trust him. She could only watch as he vanished into the shadows, his silhouette barely visible in the dim light. Seconds dragged on, stretching into what felt like an eternity, as Evelyn waited in silence. She could hear muffled sounds from the corridor, the quiet clicks of alien boots, the soft murmurs of their voices, but it felt as though time had been suspended. Every breath she took was loud in her ears, and the waiting gnawed at her. The sound of movement reached her ears, and she barely had time to react as the soldier returned, pulling her to her feet and ushering her through the door. "Now," he whispered. "Move." She barely registered what was happening as they sprinted down the hallway, the distant sound of alarms beginning to blare, the walls flashing with red lights. Evelyn's mind was racing, but one thought stood out above all others. The control center was near. They were close. Ahead, the soldier didn't break his stride. His focus was unyielding, a single-minded drive that left no room for doubt or fear. He was fighting for something larger than himself, and Evelyn could feel the weight of that purpose settling over her. They were going to make it. They had to. As they reached the entrance to the control center, the soldier halted, his hand pressed against the cold metal door. His eyes flicked toward Evelyn. Get ready? For the first time in what felt like forever, Evelyn understood. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was part of something much bigger. Something that could change the course of history. The door to the control center slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a cavernous chamber filled with pulsating lights and intricate machinery. It was like stepping into the heart of an alien world, a place that seemed both ancient and disturbingly advanced, as though it had been designed by beings who saw time differently than humans ever could. The walls were covered in shifting holographic screens, each one displaying streams of data that Evelyn couldn't begin to understand, let alone process. At the center of the room was a massive console, a sprawling matrix of buttons, levers, and dials, all glowing with the eerie light of alien energy. Evelyn's breath hitched in her throat. This was it, the moment when everything would either fall apart or shift in their favor. The soldier was already moving toward the central console, his steps precise and deliberate, but Evelyn's gaze was drawn to the far side of the room, where a series of pods lined the wall. They looked like cryogenic chambers, their surfaces glassy and smooth, and they hummed with a low, resonant sound. She instinctively took a step closer, her eyes scanning the pods for any sign of what lay inside. Her stomach lurched when she saw the faint outlines of figures suspended in the transparent chambers, human forms, their faces twisted in unnatural contortions. Some of them appeared to be in the early stages of transformation, their skin pale and stretched too tight over their bones. A shiver ran down Evelyn's spine as she realized the truth. These were not just prisoners. They were experiments. And somewhere among them she knew was Luca. Her breath caught in her throat and for a moment she could do nothing but stare. The soldier, engrossed in his task, hadn't noticed her hesitation. She was about to turn back toward him when she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Faint at first but growing louder. The aliens were coming. Move, the soldier hissed, his voice low and urgent, and Evelyn snapped out of her trance. She had no choice but to follow him, to move toward the console and whatever he was trying to do. There was no time to waste. The aliens were coming, and if they didn't act fast, the entire mission would be for nothing. She forced herself to focus as she sprinted across the room, her legs burning from the effort, her mind still reeling from the sight of the pods. The soldier's back was to her now, his hands flying over the console with practiced ease, entering commands, pulling levers, activating switches. He was a blur of movement, his face a mask of concentration as he hacked into the alien systems. Evelyn stood to his side, her hand hovering over her knife, ready for whatever came next. The alarms began to blare, their shrill tone reverberating throughout the room, signaling that they had been detected. The sound made Evelyn's pulse spike, her thoughts scrambling as the gravity of the situation pressed down on her. If the aliens had detected them, they wouldn't hesitate to destroy them. Come on, the soldier muttered under his breath, his fingers working faster. The console beeped in response, and for a brief moment, Evelyn thought they might have a chance. But then the door on the far side of the room slid open, and a new figure stepped inside. It was one of them, the aliens. But this one was different. Taller, more imposing. Its body gleamed with a metallic sheen, and its eyes glowed with a faint, unsettling light. This was no ordinary soldier. Evelyn could sense the danger radiating from it, and for a split second she wondered if this was the leader, the mastermind behind it all. The soldier beside her didn't even flinch. He was still focused on the console, his body tense, his every muscle ready to spring into action. Get ready, he said quietly, not taking his eyes off the controls. The alien leader's gaze swept across the room, locking onto them in an instant. Its eyes narrowed, its posture stiffened, and it took a slow step toward them, its movements deliberate. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she felt the weight of its gaze. There was something cold and calculating about the creature. It wasn't just here to fight. It was here to win. Evelyn's instincts screamed at her to act, but the soldier was still working, his hands flying over the console as he typed in rapid sequences. He was almost there. He had to be. The alien leader raised a hand, a thin razor-sharp blade extending from its forearm with a sickening hiss. It looked like it was made for cutting through bone, and the sight of it sent a jolt of fear through Evelyn's chest. But the soldier didn't move. He was waiting for something, watching the console with a steady, unwavering gaze. Without warning, the alien lunged. Its movements were a blur of speed and precision, A deadly dance that would have killed Evelyn instantly if she hadn't reacted in time. She dove to the side, her heart racing, just as the blade sliced through the air where she had been standing moments before. She felt the rush of air as the alien's weapon missed her by inches, and her hand instinctively went to her knife, ready to strike. The soldier's body jerked, and for the first time, Evelyn saw the crack in his composure. His hands trembled for a brief second as he entered the final command. "Now!" he shouted, and without hesitation, Evelyn launched herself toward the alien, her knife flashing in the dim light. The alien's head whipped toward her, its cold eyes narrowing as it raised its arm to block her strike. But Evelyn was faster. She twisted, using the momentum to slide underneath its guard, and with one swift motion, drove her knife into the creature's side. The alien's shriek of fury echoed through the chamber, and it stumbled back, its metallic blade clattering to the ground. But the soldier wasn't waiting. He activated the last sequence, and the console flared to life, the lights in the room flashing brighter, the hum of the machinery intensifying. The alien leader turned to flee, its body contorting in a futile attempt to escape, but it was too late. The soldier had activated a shutdown sequence, a surge of energy coursing through the alien systems. The ground beneath them rumbled and the lights flickered violently. The sound of the alien's desperate growl was swallowed by the chaos. Evelyn was on her feet now, her hands still gripping the knife, her breath shallow from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The soldier didn't flinch, didn't take a second to revel in their small victory. He moved quickly, pulling Evelyn toward the door. "We're not done yet," he muttered. They didn't stop running. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and metal, the walls seeming to close in as the facility began to tremble around them. Evelyn's pulse was a drumbeat in her ears, her body moving on instinct as they raced through the corridors. The chaos of the shutdown had triggered a series of system failures, and now the alien stronghold was in disarray. Alarms screamed, lights flickered erratically, and the ground shook beneath their feet. Evelyn didn't know how much time they had before the aliens regrouped and overwhelmed them. She didn't know if they would make it out. But she couldn't stop now. And then as they reached the exit, just as the weight of everything began to crash down on her, the soldier's voice came low and steady. "It's not over. Not until we finish what we started." And for the first time since she had entered this hellish place, Evelyn believed him.